So tonight's talk, Saving the Stone Curlew, is being given by Keith Betton. He's a media trainer, a PR consultant, a writer, and also a broadcaster. And he's a very keen world birder, having seen nearly 9,000 species in over 100 countries. So he's one of the world's top 40 birders of all time. It's fantastic. He has a particular passion for Africa and he's vice president of the African Bird Club. And in the UK, he's heavily involved in bird monitoring in Hampshire, where he's chair of the Hampshire Ornithological Society. He's been a council member of both the RSPB and BTO and vice president of the latter. His two books with Mark Avery, Behind the Binoculars and Behind More Binoculars, have been highly rated, as has his revision of Where to Watch Birds in Dorset, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. He's particularly active in protecting peregrines and stone curlews, which he's going to talk about this evening, and that has put him on BBC TV Spring Watch. He's also had, over the years, he's been involved with the London Natural History Society, and I'm delighted that last year at the AGM, he was appointed an LNHS Honorary Vice President. So I should stop my screen share now, and I'll hand over to you, Keith.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's good to be here. Let me just get my screen sharing and we'll get that on the road. There we go. Just let me know when you can see it, please.
Yep, that's fine.
That's great. Good. So let me tell you a little bit about me and LNHS. So I joined LNHS in 1975, actually. I was 15 years old. I was one of the crew that used to sit in the back row of the coach when we went on outings. There were about 4 or 5 of us. We were sort of naughty teenagers. I joined the Ornithology Committee when I was 18, and out of the blue, in 1982, I got a phone call from the then president, Rodney Betton, who said, I've got an idea I want to put to you. Have you any idea what it is? I said, well, I don't know, maybe you want me to go on a committee, I don't know. And he said, no, I actually want you to be the next president, which is pretty amazing because I guess he was in his 50s. There'd been nobody doing that job probably ever younger than 50 or 60. So there I was at 22 years old, and I agreed, and I did become the LNHS president. And I did that from 1982 to 1984. We had an amazing time. Here's a photo of me at that time. I was working in London, working for Shell and in their public relations team. And we did amazing things. We even got Diane Fossey to come to the Linnean Society rooms and give a talk. 150 people attended. I managed to get David Attenborough along as well. So it was really quite an exciting time. We also organised the very, very first computer for LNHS. I think we were one of the very first clubs to get computerised. So I stood down in 84. I then became the chair of ornithology section for about 8 years. Stayed a member for quite a while, but I'm no longer in London. So I left in the end, and I now live in Surrey on the Surrey-Hampshire border. So that's me. Let's get on to the business though. Let's talk about the stone curlew. So one of the things that I do in my spare time, I should say I had a busy career in public relations, and I actually managed to escape the rat race in my late 40s and become a freelance consultant, which is a nice life. I work when I want to. And I'm giving myself lots of time to go out and do other things. And one of the things I do is I actually run the RSPB's Stone Curlew project in the northern part of Hampshire. So this is a wonderful bird, as you just saw from that photo with its wonderful eye. And it's a worldwide group. There are actually 10 species that are stone curlews, or thick knees as they're very often called, sometimes even called dickops if you go to Africa. And the one here in the top middle is our bird, the stone curlew. It's had various names over the years. The others, I won't explain it now. I'll go through with a bit more in the way of photos. So let's have a look. Here's our bird. It's been called the Eurasian thick-knee, but currently most of us just call it the stone curlew. Fabulous bird, big eye, long legs, thick knees, as you can see. Very, very active at night time and in the twilight zone, and a really smart bird. So clever at spotting people. I mean, you can't spot it, but it will have seen you very, very early on. Here's its world distribution. So basically, it is a migrant. It comes to England, in the summer, arriving around about March, leaving in October. And that's the true also for much of the range. If you see the areas that are marked in orange, those are the areas where the bird is actually just a summer visitor. The areas in blue are areas where they go in the winter, and that includes also some areas in purple, which is where the birds are actually resident. So actually in Spain, they are there the whole time in parts of Spain, particularly in the south, but in northern Spain, they're a migrant. So that's where they're going to and from. It's the only one of the whole world group of these birds that is actually a migrant. Now, there are others. If you've been to Africa and you've been near water, then you might have seen the water thickney, which is out there in many of the wetter areas of Africa. And if you look at its distribution, it's very much towards the south of Africa, a little bit in the west, but mainly south and east. There's also the Senegal thickney, which to me is just so like our stone curlew. If one of those turned up in Hampshire, where I do my work, I honestly would think that was one of mine. It's so similar, really, really hard. So distribution, although it is flying and it's got a very similar layout of the wing pattern as well as the stone curlew, black and white wings, quite a big bird, really quite big, but like a large crow. And here's its distribution right across the middle of Africa, right up the Nile as well. And of course, from the name Senegal thickney, well, it was first spotted in Senegal, hence it's got that name. A little bit misleading. But also in Africa, we've got the spotted thickney, which is a very well camouflaged bird, sort of leopard-like colours really. And that one also is distinctive in flight. Really, you know, if I saw one of those in Hampshire, I'd have to have a good look before realizing it might not be that, might not be mine. Here it is again, very much in across that middle belt and down in the south as well. Now, if we go across to Asia, in India and Sri Lanka, we have the Indian thickney, which goes around in groups. It's actually very approachable. If you go to somewhere in India or Sri Lanka, you can just actually get out of your vehicle and walk up to these almost. They behave so differently from the bird that I spend my time watching. And here's the distribution of those around Asia. Let's go over to South America. And here, with its wonderful stripe on the top of the head, two stripes, the double striped thickney, and the one that's the sort of the tallest and nimblest one really is this one, double striped thickney, found in grassland areas in parts of northern South America, for example, there in Venezuela and Colombia, but also through places like Costa Rica and so on. There's also another one which is really kind of cute looking. This is the Peruvian thickney. This is found just in desert areas actually. And if you've ever been to Peru, you'll find that the deserts are right along the coastline. So here's the coastline of Peru. There's the distribution of the Peruvian thickney, right away along those coastal strips of sandy desert. Over to Australia, and you have the bush thickney, which is a very widespread and common bird, particularly in towns. They go around in gangs as well. They're very approachable. You can walk, for example, down the high street in Cairns in Queensland and just walk off into a nearby park, and you'll see one of these very, very quickly indeed. Here's one actually putting on a bit of an anger pose. Doesn't like the fact that it's being disturbed by somebody where its nest is. There's the range right round Australia, apart from the really dry parts in the middle. An absolute brute of a bird, this one, the beach thickney, found on the beaches in Australia and also further north. It is a really big bird indeed. It feeds on crabs and really quite a hefty bird. Look at the belly on that. It's quite a big, heavy bird. And as you can see, it's along the coastlines of Australia, but also through parts of New Guinea and Indonesia and sort of Malaysia and Thailand. And finally, the great thickney, which is the largest one of all of this family. This is again an Asian bird. It's found on areas with lots of pebbles, not necessarily going to be a coastal bird, although I have seen them on coasts. I saw my first one ever, I think, in Iran on the coast. But if you look here from the west, it's in Iran. It goes through India and through parts of Southeast Asia as well. So you can see there's quite a few of them, and here's ours again. Eurasian thickney, Eurasian stone curlew. Well, for me tonight, it's just going to be called the stone curlew. But it's had some other names too. Here's the wailing heath chicken, called that because of the sound that this bird makes. So when we finish this call, have a listen online to the sound of the stone curlew and you'll see why it's called the wailing heath chicken. And indeed, another name for it was actually the goggle-eyed plover, because it has got these huge eyes. So here's one calling, making noise. They are very noisy at night, not so noisy during the day, quite hard to find actually during the day. Nighttime is when they're really at their most active. I rather like this postage stamp we had a few years ago with the stone curlew on it. It's a lovely picture, and you can really see all the characteristics of this bird with this area of buff underneath the sort of undertail coverts. And again, the artist has managed to nail those thick knees really well, I think. So here are a few facts about the stone curlew and give you an idea of what to expect. So a length of 42 centimeters. So as I say, a bit like a large crow, but a big wingspan, because you remember this is a migrant. It's got to get all its way down into Africa, and therefore it does need the ability to have a good flying experience. The weight, about half a kilo. They breed quite quickly at 1 year old. And one of the interesting things is they breed twice. They're breeding right now. They hatched out their chicks actually last week. They then rear those, and then they have a bit of a break, and then they have another breeding attempt, usually around July. But bizarrely, in the areas where this bird is resident, for example, in Spain and in North Africa, where the birds don't migrate, they actually only breed once. And that surely is because it is actually very hot and very dry, and I imagine they can't get enough insects to sustain a second brood. So when they have a brood, it is 2 eggs in the nest. Very rarely do we have more than 2. We often have 1, but we've had 3 and we've also had 4. And in those cases, that's where a second female has come along and shared the nest. It's a bit of a disaster because, you know, it's although it's quite a large bird, it's not able to cover 3 or 4 eggs very well. So that usually results in no chicks being born. But if they are actually successful, after 27 days of incubation, the birds will hatch, usually on the same day, and they will be off and on their feet within 4 to 6 hours. They usually hatch during the night, and then they are out wandering around the nearby field very quickly, just like lapwing chicks do. You know, lapwings get out of the nest the first day they're born. The big difference between lapwings and stone curlews, though, is that lapwing chicks feed themselves, and stone curlew chicks, generally speaking, wait to be fed. So they generally sit down and hide, and they're very hard to see. So things like kites and buzzards don't really see them, whereas I'm afraid lapwing chicks are rather obvious because they're always on the move looking for food. Anyway, if it does go well, the oldest stone curlew we know of is 22 years old. So here's a bird having a bit of a rest. They do crouch down like this. It's quite an unusual look. But they very often do that to avoid being seen. You know, they do that when they see a predator, or if they see you, they'll crouch down in the hope that you will not see them. And there's a photo of one keeping its eye on me and trying to keep out of the way. They do obviously drink, and one of the things I've got on one of my farms that I survey about 10 farms, is actually I've got a drinking pool, big pool made by the farmer, and all the local stone curlews come into this. There's about 5 stone curlews in the area around there, and they all use that pool. They kind of have a truce when they get there. They decide not to upset each other because they need that water a lot, and they fly off quite often to 2 or 3 miles away in order to get to wherever they're going to be nesting. And here are some coming in flight. You can see that rather nice gingery under tail coverts on the bottom left bird there, but not on the one above. So I'm not quite sure if that one above's a female, maybe just a younger bird not quite sure. They're very similar. In fact, they actually look, the young birds look like adults by August. So it's really hard to know whether you're looking at a young bird or an adult. But here's one coming into land, and you can see it's got these black tips to the tail feathers. So just to remind you again, it's the only one of its family to go migrating around the world. And you can see there, we've got records going all the way from Kenya right the way across West Africa. The ones from Kenya, they would be coming down from Asia, and our birds from ringing results we know go as far as Ghana. And here are some BTO ringing results showing colour ring birds that we have ringed. The dots indicate, the colour of the dots indicates the months that they were found in, so don't worry about that. It's over the winter period. But what we're seeing there is the route they take. And there's obviously a bit of a gathering on the west coast, southwest coast of France as they head south. We've done colour ringing over the years. It's on hold at the moment. We might start again, but it's told us a huge amount about these birds. We've actually colour ringed 5,000 individuals, both where I'm based and also up in East Anglia. And these colour rings, you can have a combination of three. Here you can see on a bird, black, white and green. And then you can also see a BTO ring at the very top of the leg. Now this bird is not in great shape, as you can tell. It's actually been the victim of a predator. And the one in particular was this female peregrine. So this is a big female peregrine, young bird with the, you can tell from the brown plumage and the pale edging on the wings. And she was an absolute expert at getting wading birds flying over. So on the ground just in front of her, you can see she's got a woodcock. There was another woodcock down by where my feet were, as was the stone curlew. Now, I'm pretty sure this is actually a Scandinavian peregrine, much, much bigger than any others. I work on peregrines in Hampshire, monitoring 25 nests. I've never seen a bird as big as this. So as it was in the winter, this would be, I'm sure, a young 1 year old, or not quite 1 year old female from Scandinavia. And by the way, when stone curlews migrate, they very often migrate at night. So of course, in a city, that was in Southampton, in a city like that, they're going to be really spotlit by the very, very bright lights down in the city. So peregrines take advantage of that. Well, going back over the years, back in the days when the LNHS had just been formed, well, actually it's 1858, I think it was born, but back in those days, stone curlews were found all the way as far north as Yorkshire, very much on the eastern side of England. And if you go into museums up and down the sort of English counties, you'll find, sadly, examples of stone curlews that were killed at the time. Here we have a pair with 2 chicks. They were actually quite common. There were probably between 1,000 and 2,000 pairs in England. And this map gives you an idea back in the late 1800s where they were found. So the darker the shading is indicates the density of the population. So yeah, you can see they were around London, but not in London. And they were very much in East Anglia and Dorset and Wiltshire and Hampshire and Sussex. And even today, we get records all over the place. I mean, here are some records off the bird track system, just seeing where these had turned up. These are all stone curlews that are not on breeding locations. They've just turned up randomly and been found away from where they'd be expected, including, as you can see, Shetland and northern Scotland and Ireland. So it was actually kept as a pet by Victorians, and always surprised me that they would bother to keep something like this as a pet. But then I found out why. And it's simply that it was thought by some Victorians that if you had jaundice, then the cure for that would be to look into the eye of a stone curlew. And I have no doubt that it completely failed, but these people were convinced. And so, yes, that's why they kept them in captivity. In fact, they'd be in the house very often, the way you might have a pet dog or a pet cat, you'd have a pet stone curlew. And they fed them on strips of pork and also bread. Apparently, they're quite well house trained as well. But the eye really is exceptionally bright. You don't realize quite how bright it is until you get one in the hand. So I took that photograph when I was ringing this chick. So my very first stone curlew came to me thanks to the LNHS. It was in 1975, I think, when I was 15, and we did an outing to Weeting Heath in Norfolk to see the stone curlews there. And back then, that's where everybody thought of going to see stone curlews. Nobody thought, oh, let's go down to Hampshire or let's go to Wiltshire, much nearer. They actually went to Weeting Heath. And the reason is that in places like Hampshire, all of these birds were kept really, really secret. Nobody would talk about them. I was county recorder in Hampshire for about 15 years, and I went through some of the old records from the 1950s and so on, and they just would say it wouldn't even give the nearest town. It would say 5 pairs on the chalk, whatever that means. So we have no idea really where they were back then. But Weeting Heath had them. And the great thing about Weeting Heath is it was covered in rabbits and short grass, and it was a rabbit warren, so the stone curlews loved it, and they would nest quite close to where the rabbits were nesting because there was bare ground. Now, since the decline in the rabbit population in the UK, we've now seen so many fewer of them, and grass is very much often longer on downland reserves and things like that. So numbers of stone curlews on that kind of habitat have declined quite a bit. They've moved into other areas. For example, this is Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, where the Ministry of Defence, of course, are all the time carrying out activities. It's completely off limits apart from a few roads going through it. And there are best part of, I think, 70 or 80 stone curlews on Salisbury Plain, all of them on areas that have been left for them and plots and so on. So we go back to those early days, the 60s and 70s. This is from the first BTO atlas. It shows you where stone curlews were back then. There was a good population in the south around Wiltshire and Hampshire. Also still quite a good population in Sussex, even a pair at Dungeness. They were in Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridge, also Berkshire and Oxfordshire. If we then move forward, we now look at the situation from the third BTO atlas, just skip past the second one. And this was the most recent situation. So you've got still those Wiltshire and Hampshire birds. Sussex has almost vanished. They've put them in bigger circles to keep the information secret. They're still in Norfolk and Suffolk, but if I show you the change map, you'll see that there's been quite a change in distribution. So anything on here that is a black triangle is a place that the birds have disappeared from. Anything with a red triangle is where they've moved into and they've now taken up residence. And the areas with pink shading, well, these are areas where the birds were present always, and they still are. So you would think from that, wouldn't you, that this bird has completely crashed and been lost. But the truth is that we've managed to persuade stone curlews to group together in areas where we manage the land for them. And quite a lot of my talk is going to be about how we do that and why we do it and what the results have been from it. And just to zoom in on the southeast, here's our Wiltshire and Hampshire population with a couple of dots also in Berkshire. And this is actually from the Hampshire Bird Atlas, which we produced at the time of the last BTO Atlas. And you will see there that all the stone curlews are really focused up in the northwest of the county. I've actually mapped them here centrally because we don't want to reveal the exact locations, but you can see that's where they are. But if we now look at the change between the first atlas and the third atlas, well, this tells a very interesting story. So the areas of red are basically bits of downland. You've probably heard of Martin Down in the southwest of Hampshire. There are places like Cheesefoot Head, Longwood Warren, Old Winchester Hill. They all had stone curlews in the 1960s and 70s, but they've gone. And if you now look at the top, you'll see all the green pluses. And the green pluses is where the RSPB, and I'm part of their team, as I said, put together a plan to try and create farm situations where stone curlews could move in and live safely with wardens and people looking after them. It is a bird that migrates, as I say. Normally, you find them coming in March and leaving you in October, but this is just a few years ago. And the last one to leave us in 2022 was on the 15th of November, and 17th of February was when they came back, in fact, on the same farm. So only away for 13 weeks. And in fact, something else was happening. Let me just show you first of all the chart showing sightings of stone curlews. As you can see, the arrival is in March. You might just be able to see, though, at the beginning of the year, there's a little mark there. You can see some birds were being seen in January and February, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So anyway, you can see they arrived quite quickly in March and April, a big peak at the beginning of June. So that's when they're quite busy with their first brood of chicks, which hatched out, as I say, about a week ago. So that's when those chicks are going to be running around, and therefore the adults are going to be running around too. The second peak at the beginning of August, well, that is when they have their second brood, and the same thing happens again. Not as many nest on the second attempt because, of course, by then it's all heated up. Maybe insects are harder to find. But what I did want to talk about was this. Stone curlews started to winter in Britain around about 2000, and they started to winter in East Anglia on sugar beet farms, mainly in Norfolk. I think around about 20 birds were involved, maybe a few more on occasions. And these would have been family groups where, for whatever reason, the family, the parents had chosen not to migrate, and so therefore the chicks didn't migrate. And those birds became resident. So for about 18 years, we had wintering stone curlews in Norfolk. But and there's a photograph by Chris Knights, who's done an amazing book on stone curlews, a stone curlew in the snow in Norfolk. But if you remember 2018, we had that very cold spell, the beast from the east. 3 weeks of snow and really terrible conditions, very hard for stone curlews to find any kind of food. And almost all of them died. In fact, I think every single one, as far as we know, that spent the winter died that year. So down where I live now, having spent 30 years in London, I've had 35 years now on the Hampshire-Surrey border. We've got lovely hills, the North Downs, the South Downs, and stone curlews are in these areas. But the real problem actually is that places where stone curlews used to like are now very popular with walkers, people wanting to go out and get some exercise, get some fresh air, and why not? But back in the early days, these were areas that hardly anybody went to. So stone curlews have kind of got pushed out. They've also been pushed out a bit by farming. And so we've had to get involved and try and create a sort of fake situation for them. So what the RSPB team do is we go to farms where stone curlews are being seen. We select an area of 2 hectares in the farm, and the farmer will get paid money for allowing us to basically stop them from putting crop in that part of the farm and leaving it just for stone curlews with bare ground. And here's a typical plot prepared with agreement of the farmer, who would get something in the region of, I think, £1,600 for doing this, which is in lieu of any money they might have earned from growing crops. And you've got these bare patches on the fields. They prepare them in March, so the stone curlews have them just right for them when they arrive, and then you have to prepare them again a bit later on. And of course, the reason why you have to prepare them again is that the lovely arable plants grow up, and stone curlews don't like living amongst plants. Stone curlews like to be on a nice bare field. And you might think, well, where are they going to be on that field? Well, I'll tell you where they'll be. They'll be on the right-hand side. And if we zoom in, there they are. I've put a circle around them. They're standing in amongst all this vegetation, probably thinking, shall we bother to nest or shall we go somewhere else? So anyway, in that case, I got the farmer out there the next day, and we got that field nicely cultivated over so that all the weeds were turned in, and they nested immediately. It was fantastic. And this is actually up in Breckland in Norfolk, where Weeting Heath is. I did that very early LNHS outing in 1975. And you can see there are lots of plots all over Breckland with the land there. So when I talk about lightly turned soil, this is what I mean. I don't want great big divots. I want something nice and stony, and perhaps a little bit of a buffer down the middle, because that can help stone curlews to hide their chicks, particularly if there are predators around that they want to avoid. They start to display in April. Here's the male on the left doing his display with the female watching, and then mating fairly soon after that. And I just want to show you what it looks like to have a nest. So this is a bit of video actually I filmed for Spring Watch. It's a little bit grainy here, but I'll just show it to you. Let's hope. Oh, hang on, it nearly happened. Hang on. It's just, here we go. Right, the bird's going to come in. Here it is. Watch how it sits down. Okay, so you saw how carefully it sat down. It didn't just plop down on the ground. It sat down very carefully indeed because it's got eggs there. So that is how you know a stone curlew is nesting. If it just sits in a field and goes plop like it's sitting on a toilet, well, that's not a nest. But if it does all this kind of shimmying around and opening the breast feathers to get the brood patch exposed, that'll be it. Let me see if I can show that again. It might be nice to see that a second time. So just watch the way it opens the feathers on the breast. There's bare skin underneath. Wait for it. There we go, like a hovercraft, and down on the eggs to keep them warm. Both the male and the female take equal shares in the brooding. So they both have brood patches, not just the female. And oh, here we go again. Right. And you know, because of that, they change over at the nest quite often. So if you're watching a bird on a possible nest, well, if you sit there for an hour and a half or so, they'll do something. If they're still sitting there 2 or 3 hours later, you know they're just having a sleep. So here's a stone curlew nest, and it's basically a little platform of stones put down by the birds. The female makes a little kind of dent. The male mainly collects up the stones, tiny stones, and brings them in and creates this little platform that the eggs go on. And this is really, I'm sure, to keep the eggs off the mud. You know, a day like today when it's raining on and off, you don't want to have eggs on mud. They could get sort of cemented in, as it were. But also, I'm sure there are going to be times when a colder day, perhaps if there's been sunshine, those stones may retain some heat, which is useful. They're quite hard to see, as you can tell. Now, here's an example of a nest of 3 eggs for those who've just arrived. This is very unusual indeed. Only you get this when you have 2 females, and extraordinary when you do actually get a chick hatching, because it's very hard for a stone curlew to actually cover those eggs. There's a chick coming out. And here's the exceptional example of 4 eggs in Norfolk. And not surprisingly, none of them hatched. So we found the nest. We've got to mark the nest. Now, in the old days, we used to put these yellow canes out, which was so the farmer knew that there was a stone curlew nest, maybe perhaps put a cane 5 meters either side of the nest. But, you know, carrion crows are smart, and they very quickly worked out that if you see some canes in the field, then that's going to be a stone curlew nest. So we had to stop doing that. And we now, well, thankfully, you can now use GPS, because all the tractors that farmers use have GPS in. So you just get them to program in where the stone curlew nest is, and they avoid it. But it is hard for a tractor driver to see stone curlew eggs, and you can just see them there. Very hard to spot that. And, you know, without our intervention, a lot of these birds would have their nests crushed by people who quite innocently are just driving a tractor across their farm. And, you know, we also get stone curlews that turn up on farms where nobody's actually invited them in, and you get a nest and the farmer says, look, what am I to do? In 1 or 2 cases, I've had farmers who will not adjust their straight line on their field. So I'm licensed and I'm allowed to pick up the eggs, remove them just for a few seconds whilst the tractor goes through, and then put them back down again. But, you know, 95% of farmers are just delighted to have stone curlews, and they're very happy to have a squiggly line on their field where they avoided getting over the eggs. And one of the most important things to do is to understand whether these are about to hatch or not. And if you've just found the nest, what you can do is you can weigh the eggs and also measure the eggs. So by measuring, you're going to know the volume of the egg. And if you know the weight, then you can calculate using a particular calculation the ratio. And you can then work out how many more days before this egg is going to hatch. And it's pretty accurate within a couple of days. And the great thing is then that if I do that and it says, oh, there's 2 weeks to go, then that's fine. The farmer can get on with whatever they want. But if it said they're going to hatch in 3 days, then that's the point when I say to the farmer, right, whatever you've got to do it today, because in 2 days' time, there are likely to be small chicks walking around near the nest, and that would be really terrible if they ended up getting killed. And farmers are fantastic. They always agree with that. And it's really important because, as you can see here, just down in front of that farmer, there are a couple of chicks in the field. And in a situation like that, again, I'm licensed to go in, find the chicks, which I will do very often using a thermal imager, and I will then just keep them warm whilst they do the operation near the nest, and then everything's okay. And the parents come back straight away, barely make a noise actually, and come down and look after the chicks straight away. Here's one crouching down a bit. They're very cautious and wary. They're also very good at chasing off other things. So, for example, sheep and deer, they don't like having those near the nest. Sheep will happily gobble down some eggs, so will deer. They're also quite aggressive towards rabbits and things like that. Here's a young lamb who obviously was straying too close to the nest. It's a rather grainy photo, but it's by Chris Knight's in Norfolk. And here's the stone curlew giving the lamb a bit of a nip on the nose because it clearly isn't taking any notice. And then they all get involved and try and get rid of that lamb. As you can see, the eggs are just there beneath that bird on the left. They're brilliant parents. They really, really are. And here's one, yeah, putting its wings wide open to say to a rabbit, you know, don't go here. You know, we've got a nest. But if all goes well, you will get 2 chicks. And here are 2 very, very small chicks. These are just literally a day or so, maybe 2 days old. And at that age, the parents, both male and female, will keep them warm by sitting on them. I was watching some yesterday, and yeah, you know, they really do want to keep them warm on a day like yesterday when there was hailstones coming down and rain and then sunshine. It's a crazy day. And here we are about a week later, and that's roughly where they are right now, that sort of age, most of them. So you've got stone curlews with chicks walking around the field like that. And they will hide the chick under maybe a dock leaf or a thistle, and they will then find some food, make sure there are no kites or buzzards watching, and then go over to the chick and feed it. It's a good strategy and works very well. One of the cutest chicks you can see, but you know, even at a week old, I can tell that's a stone curlew. It's got the patterning already. It's designed to be totally invisible. And like, trust me, when I've ringed these birds, I've quite often put them back down on the ground and then turned around to try and find them again, and I can't see them. They're so well camouflaged. This is a little bit later when it's grown up a bit, and it's still too young to be ringed. So it's now about 2.5 weeks old, getting a few feathers in there. But here we are at exactly the right age for ringing. Got the adult on the right and 2 chicks on the left. And they're at the stage where they can't fly. They can run. They can run really well, actually, run faster than I can. But generally what happens is that if you're approaching them, the parents will fly off and the chicks will just simply hit the ground and go completely flat. And as long as someone's watching what's going on from maybe a telescope on the edge of the field, they can probably see where those chicks went down and they can guide me in. And when you find them, that's how they are, just absolutely flat to the ground, pretending that they can't see you. And they are so well camouflaged, they're hard to find. But anyway, here we are doing the ringing process, which, as I mentioned earlier, we're not currently doing. You know, I'm often asked, how many people does it take to ring a stone curlew chick? Well, it seems like it's quite a few people, really, because here I am on my knees, getting things organized, putting the BTO ring on the bird. I've got my colleague Janice, who's just keeping the bird still. I've got my other colleague Barry with the glue, which we'll be putting on the plastic rings to keep them secure. Excuse me. And then we've got the gamekeeper on the left, who's been keeping all the crows out of the way and making sure these birds have a good chance. And then we've got the farmer himself who's taken the photograph. And, you know, in a moment like this, when you've got these birds, it is a fantastic opportunity to allow the farmer to bond farmer and family bond with stone curlew because you can hand them the chick that's just been born on their farm, and once you've held a stone curlew chick, you absolutely love the birds to death. And I've seen farmers being competitive with each other about the fact, one will say, "Oh, I've got a pair of stone curlews, you haven't," and another one will say, "Well, I've got two pairs of stone curlews." So it's a bit of a badge of honour that if you've got stone curlews, you've obviously got a very good farm. We obviously do measurements on the birds to see how they're developing, and it's actually not going to hurt the bird. We just put it quietly down, keep it upside down, well, not upside down, but head down, and we put the colour rings on. And that's what people are spotting around the world when they see in France or Spain one of our stone curlews. They can see the coloured rings and they can report them back to us. And that's, really useful for me too, because when birds turn up at a particular plot, if they've got rings on, then I've got an idea as to who they are. I don't always get a complete combination of all the rings because sometimes they fall off. But, this bird on the right, I can tell every time it comes back, it's the same bird. And the other one's not ringed, but if it was, then that would give me a lot of life history on these stone curlews. And here is a couple of chicks which we rescued. They nested, they were born on a field put aside for them, really successful. But then when they got older, at this age, about 3.5 weeks old, they went into a field of rape to obviously hide. And but unfortunately, a farmer had to cut the rape. So the combine harvester's coming along the field, and I'm thinking, how are we going to save these birds? If you've ever tried walking through rape in sort of August, it's not fun. And I basically waited and waited, talked to the farmer on a walkie-talkie, and eventually the stone curlews, at the very last moment, as he was coming forward very slowly, they rushed out, and I grabbed them and put them in the back of my car and kept them safe whilst we finished that operation. And pleased to say, I got a gift from the stone curlews afterwards. Here we are. I don't know if you know, Chris Packham is absolutely obsessed about bird poo, and he's never forgiven me for this one because he's never smelt stone curlew bird poo. Trust me, you don't want to. You'll do it once and you won't bother another time. It is very pungent for reasons I don't know. They only eat worms, but my goodness. Here are the same birds, actually, just a few weeks later. The young birds are at the front, and you can see they're slightly puffier in the face, a little bit darker as well. You can tell they're young birds, and there's the adult behind. So, clearly by doing that, we saved those birds' life, which is really, really a great thing to do when you've spent all that time protecting the eggs and watching them grow up. And it's wonderful to see birds like this. Here's a young stone curlew having a go at a privet hawk moth. I don't know whether it thought it was a good idea or not, but it found it in a hedge and had a go. So looking at the numbers, this is a chart showing you the population just in the area that's Wessex. So that's Wiltshire and Hampshire, probably adding in Berkshire and Sussex. And you can see that back in the 1990s, the population was around about 50 to 60 pairs. That's all. And yet today, the population is almost, certainly twice, if not 3 times now, what it was before. There are a few dips in there. The one in 2001 is simply the foot and mouth disease. So it's just that we couldn't go out and do the surveying. So it's not a real dip. Should be a dotted line really. But there are dips in 2013, which was the very cold winter there. Another big dip, as I mentioned, in 2018 and others later. So, they do struggle when it's very cold. But here's the key thing for me. We are given a target by the RSPB to try and get 0.6 of a chick per pair per year to fledging. So in other words, flying. And if you do that, then the population will remain stable. And if you go above that, above the red line, the population will increase. Well, we had a bit of a rough time during, about 10 years ago, but we've really nailed it now. So we now get something in the region of 0.8 chicks per pair per year. And as a result of that, the population is now expanding and we've got more stone curlews than we've ever had before. And the proof of that is when you go out in the autumn and you find an autumn flock of stone curlews in one field. Now, if you've never seen a stone curlew, here's, I think, about 60 in one field. In fact, there were 74 in the end. It's a field in North Hampshire. So it's the local population altogether, plus a few extras who've obviously come along and maybe seen them in the field and joined them. And they obviously then head off in family groups, migrating. So a few leave each day. The young birds do go with the adults. And here they are flying around. You know, what a wonderful sight. Lapwings as well, and a couple of black-headed gulls. And, you know, great to see many young stone curlews amongst that as they go. And it's a great team effort. We've got obviously landowners who are giving us the land to work with. We've got gamekeepers and other farm staff who are making sure that, you know, everything possible that can be done to help these birds is done. For example, predation control, keeping crow numbers at a low level. And of course the birders, and I was very delighted to be selected as one of the 5 people called a Stone Curlew Hero by the RSPB a few years ago when they celebrated the project. So it's a great thing to do. Sometime I hope London Natural History Society will come down to Hampshire, and if you'd like to do that, I will happily show you stone curlews. I've got a farm which would be very happy to receive you, and it would be easy to do. But thank you very much for listening. And here's a stone curlew chick just before I put some rings on it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, put my earplugs back in, and I'll hand over to you to give me the questions that you'd like to